Good evening and a warm welcome to each one of you at a national conference on securing demographic dividend and agenda for change 2024-29. I'm Vishal Gaikwad and it's my privilege to be host here for this inaugural session. We are gathered here for 7th year of this esteemed conference organized by Pune International Center in a collaboration with other eminent institutes. Each year, this conference brings together a wealth of knowledge, experience and insight, and this year is no exception. As we embark on this intellectual journey, over the next 2 days, we aim to dwell deep into myriad aspects of India's demographic dividend and transformative change required to harness its full potentials. I am honored to introduce Dr. Ajit Ranade, the Vice Chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, who is the chairman of today's session. Dr. Ranade's profound knowledge and contribution to the field of economics are well known and respected. His guidance and insights are invaluable to this conference. Welcome, sir. So we are also privileged to have with us Professor Ajay Shah, Senior Research Fellow and co-founder the Ex-KDR Forum. Professor Shah is a renewed thought leader and his keynote address today's title, State Capacity Building, promises to offer a groundbreaking perspective on one of the most crucial topics in the recent times. Welcome, sir. I also welcome our Vice President, Pune International Center, Dr. Kelkar. He don't need any introduction. So welcome, sir. So this conference is now in its 7th year, stand as a testament to the collaborative spirits of the academia, industry, and policymaking. It's a platform where ideas meet actions, where the challenges of today's are addressed with the solutions for tomorrow's. We look forward for 2 days stimulating discussion, insightful debates, and collaborative learnings. The sessions ahead are designed to not only ponder over the challenges, but also to identify the actionable strategy that can drive India's tomorrow, a brighter, more prosperous future. As we proceed, I encourage each one of you to actively participate, engage in discussions, and contribute your valuable insights. Your participation is what makes this conference melting a pot of ideas and innovations. So once again, thank you for being here. Your presence and participations make this event a confluence of great minds and ideas. Let's look forward to an enlightening and enriching experience. Thank you. And let me begin this journey of knowledge and discovery. Without further ado, I hand over to Dr. Ranade. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vishal. And I join him in welcoming all of you to the inaugural session of the National Conference on Securing Demographic Dividend here in Pune. I think Dr. Vishal mentioned this is the 6th or is it 7th year we are holding this important national conference, annual conference. And I must mention that we are joined, this is a partnership effort among 4 different institutions. CUTS International, of course, the founder of CUTS is with us, Mr. Pradeep Mehta. Special welcome to you. Then we have the Pune International Center represented here, of course, by many of us, but most importantly by the Vice President of Pune International Center, Dr. Vijay Kelkar. And India Development Foundation, we are missing, I think, Subhashish Gangopadhyay is not well. So in his absence, we will allow Dr. Kelkar to be his proxy and play a double role. And this year, I think, I'm not sure if it was last year, but this year we also have this futuristic Pac-Man kind of symbol called Ex-KDR represented by Dr. Ajay Shah. So this is the conference, as you know, it's in 7th edition. Is some of the special features of the conference are it's a roundtable format, it's a discussion format. So don't please be misled or disheartened by the quantity of participants, but the quality of discussion is very high and very stimulating. The format has always been that we kick it off in the evening like this, today's Friday, and then we have a very rich and full agenda for tomorrow. And I, of course, oh, by the way, I should also mention Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics is also a partner, and I'm proud to be representing it, but of course I have my colleagues here, many of them here, Professor Venki, Professor Gurdas, Professor Dhanmanjari Sathe, who are here, and some more may join tomorrow also. and of course Dr. Vishal, not to forget Professor Pete. So we have, and Professor Apte. So actually we have actually overwhelmed the audience here. So it should be called a Gokhale Institute seminar. And those of you who are visiting from outside Pune, if you get some time, including Mr. Mehta, please find time to pay a short visit. It's just 10 minutes away. So this year's theme is called Securing Demographic Dividend and Agenda for Change 2024-29. So let me straight away give you a clue why 2024-29, because as you know, we are now going to be soon entering the so-called election season. What I mean by that is the national election, the 16th or is it the 17th Lok Sabha. And so we want to use this opportunity of this conference to actually discuss issues which collectively we will brainstorm and later, very soon, produce a document, a kind of a policy document which will be sent as inputs to the various political parties as they get into the manifesto making mode. And of course, we will hopefully give it much wider publicity even beyond the manifesto teams. I hope, Dr. Kelkar, I'm not stealing your thunder, but this needs to be repeated and reiterated. So that is one of the very tangible outcomes we are hoping to come out of this conference. So it is not narrowly focused, even though we say it's securing demographic dividend, and traditionally these 7 editions of this conference have been focusing on labor issues, migration, on human capital, human resources. So therefore, in that sense, the demographic dividend is actually related to that theme. But this year, similar to 5 years ago, I think, we want to take advantage of the fact that we will have a very quality brainstorming, and therefore we'll use all these inputs and collectively produce a document which will go towards 2024-29. That explains the subtext. So, as chair of this session, I get the privilege of saying a few more things, so let me use that privilege. See, and I know I'm speaking before a very enlightened and learned audience, so please bear with me, but it bears repetition. So India's priority today, India's priority today is high, sustainable, and inclusive growth, economic growth. So we want the growth to be relatively high. And when I say high, maybe 7.5% is not high enough. We can debate what the number is, but it has to be high. It has to be sustainable in the sense it can't be just 1 or 2 years of a spike, which we have experienced in the last 20 years. We've had spikes of 9% growth, but only 2-3 years. So we need it to be sustainable year after year, perhaps for at least 20 years. And we also need it to be inclusive. By inclusive growth, I mean, and this is not an empty slogan word. By inclusive, I mean that if the growth rate of the economy is 8 or 9% in a sustained fashion, is that growth sufficiently spread across all income classes? So it so happens that often when the economy is growing at 8%, it may happen that the per capita income of the lowest decile is only increasing at 1%, whereas the per capita income of the higher decile is increasing at 8 or 10%. Each one of you, please look at yourself and see what returns you have got to your own human capital in the course of your life. And is that something that every person in India can aspire to or has experienced? So inclusive growth necessarily means the strategy is going to be slightly different from just high and sustainable growth. See, for example, when the IT sector was booming, around the time, I think the Y2K phenomenon of 1999 provided a huge fillip to India's software services industry. I think that was a very big, to my mind at least, a big trigger. After that, I'm told, within a few years, and this is from NASSCOM and it was quoted by a few leaders, there was a time in India when they said 40% of all income tax collection, 40% of income tax collected in India came only from the IT and services software sector. It's a mind-boggling and an astonishing number. I'm sure it's not true anymore, but that's the kind of impact the IT revolution had and continues to have today. See, today when I ask people, by the way, let me just finish that first line, that India needs to have high, sustained and inclusive economic growth. But that growth alone is not just inclusive, but it has to lead to employment growth, and that employment growth also should have higher growing wages, higher quality jobs, and higher productivity. So it's quite a bit of an ask. Okay. So I just want to, and third point. So these are the 3 propositions. We need high, sustained and inclusive growth. Secondly, we also need relatively high growth in employment, which is of higher and higher quality and growing productivity and therefore higher wages. And thirdly, I submit to you that such growth of India is not possible unless we tap into the world market. We will not be able to attain high, sustainable and inclusive growth by just closing ourselves, by being insular or being inward looking. So we have to be ambitious about tapping into the world markets. By that I mean it has to have a big component of foreign trade and exports. So here I just want to give you, since I mentioned IT services, I asked a typical audience like this, what is India's #1 export item today? But since this is a very learned audience, they are going to quickly give the right answer. Answer is software services. Okay, we are already at $220 billion, and we are in shouting distance of $350 billion. These are numbers put out by NASSCOM. So then I asked people, what is India's #2 export? So I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute or half a minute. What is India's #2 export item? Textiles, petroleum, gems and jewelry. So I succeed every time. Sir, it's remittances. $100 billion of remittances. And India is now ahead of China for the last several years in a row and growing at about 5 or 10%. Remittances and software services is nothing but export of human capital, human resources, If there's one thing that we have in abundance, and now I think as of this year, India has become the most populated country in the world. So together, 200 plus 100, 300, we are already $350 billion of exports. Our manufactured exports, which did very well, was 420 billion or something this year, and 350 is officially services exports are 320 or 330, but if you count, so it's neck to neck. Most of the story of export, I know this is a topic after Mr. Pradeep Mehta's heart, so please bear with me for some time. So this neck to neck, and if you go ahead in the next few years, I think this is the transformational opportunity that we have. So I just want to say that if we think about what should be strategy to achieve high, sustained, inclusive growth with wage growth and so on, and we are talking about demographic dividend, much of the story is hidden in what we do to our human capital strategy. And it's all about skills, training, education, services sector opportunity. And of course, there will be some element of what do we do about movement of people, because the remittances come from people who have moved out of India, right? So what do we do to enable that this remains unhindered in this somewhat troubling times of xenophobia or people, when you stand in line for a visa in a German consulate or in a American embassy, they see you as a potential immigrant. You just want a visa to go and deliver software services in Munich. But they cannot distinguish between a software services guy or a nursing staff who's just going to deliver services as against a potential immigrant. So you just get clubbed together. So this is something the WTO specialists call the mode 4 of delivery of services, right? That means sometimes to deliver services, human beings need to move across borders, even though nowadays you can work from home. And that is something so therefore India must invest in multilateralism on this aspect. But anyway, this is not my lecture, I'm just chairing this session. So I thought these are the thoughts I want to leave with you as I now invite our keynote speaker today, Professor Ajay Shah. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to Ajit's point about software, there are many different ways to define what are the top level industries of India. But if you take a standard 2-digit classification, there are some 14 industries amongst the large companies of India, and the biggest industry is software. So the biggest industry of India is software. What do? We do software. This is becoming, it used to be that India was a highly diversified export portfolio, industrial portfolio. We're becoming a one-trick pony. We are a software country. We don't do anything else at that level of excellence that we do software. Okay, I was frankly terrified at doing an interesting and useful talk in front of this audience. This is an expert audience. All the standard things have been said before. All of you have read thousands of opinion pieces and hundreds of papers. So what could I say that would be mildly interesting? Okay, so I've chosen the title From Cup to Lip. Why has Indian growth faltered? That we have every right to win and it isn't working. So I think it demands interesting questioning from our side. I'm going to do three things. I'm going to remind us of long-term growth as seen in the UK. In some ways, familiar facts, but it's interesting to go back and look at the data clearly. And that connects integrally with what today we call the old growth theory. Then I'm going to review facts about labor capital and growth in India. And then talk about the new growth theory. All of us are on board on these things. And I think it gives us the fundamental framing on how to think about our puzzle today around the table and what should we as India be thinking 2024 to 2029. Okay, so let me get started at long-term growth and the old growth theory. The most fundamental fact about modern economies is long-term sustained growth. Ajit talked about 7.5%. It is true that South Korea had something like 10% growth for 25 years. But, in a way, that's an exception. And what has actually worked for advanced economies has been sustained long-term growth, and they've kept going for many, many decades. If you take Japan, they got started at the Meiji Restoration, something like 1869. And by 1905, they were at European levels, or then European levels of per capita GDP, which is similar to where India is today. And they kept going after the Second World War. So very long decades does the trick. Slow and steady wins the race. And so sustainable is a very important caveat. Before we got to the financial, industrial, scientific and political revolutions, this was not the case. There was no sustained growth in the world until we got to 17th century UK. And so let's use UK data to see the long story. Okay, so the first picture I want to show you is from 1270 AD to 1760 AD. Okay, and I wish to make 7 claims. And the first amazing claim, parenthetically, is that the UK has per capita GDP data going back to 1270. Okay, so this is a mad country. They do these things pretty well. Now, claim 2, there was little growth in the first 500 years. You see some 1300 to 1400, there was some 50% per capita GDP growth. Then there was the Black Death, and it pretty much stalled. And there was no growth for the first 500 years of this journey. And then the UK got great revolutions. There was a political revolution with the emergence of democracy. There was a financial revolution with the stock market. There was a scientific revolution, which is like Newton. There was an industrial revolution, which is like James Watt. Okay, so 4 revolutions happened together in that island. Many times we in India, in my opinion, overestimate the role of Newton and James Watt. We overstate the role of the scientific and engineering side. We don't give enough respect to the political and financial revolutions that simultaneously took place. Okay, so the UK learned to dethrone the king. The UK learned to limit the power of the state. Okay, there's a Khanvilkar ruling at the Supreme Court recently on the Enforcement Directorate and the PMLA. Well, it is violative of the Magna Carta, which is 1215 AD. Okay, so after the Magna Carta, you could no longer do the Khanvilkar ruling. That is the political revolution of the UK. And that is the foundation. And I think we in India think like a Chinese model that as long as you get enough science and technology, you'll be fine. And that's not true. You need the political foundations. You need that freedom. You need the civil liberties. Okay, now look at the graph go forward to 1860. So James Watt, the steam engine, is 1776. It's important to see that the journey of UK growth began before James Watt. And in fact, coming up to a steam engine is actually very hard. If you were doing handlooms and artisanal craft, you can't invent a steam engine. There had to be considerable scientific and engineering development to get to the steam engine. And that's what you see in the graph, that by about 1650, Newton was surrounded by people who were trying to make telescopes and trying to figure out the latitude and longitude of a ship in the sea. Okay, Newton was born in 1642. So by the late 1600s, there was a scientific and engineering ferment in the UK, which delivered sustained GDP growth. And the dates line up nicely. 1688 was a glorious revolution when Charles I had his head cut off. and Oliver Cromwell established the authority of the parliament, that there will be no kings, there will be no dictator, there will be the parliament. And so that 1688 is the Glorious Revolution. You see that date here, that political freedom came to the UK, and that created safety in the eyes of the private sector, who were then willing to invest. The UK sucked in savings from all over Europe. In Europe, there were powerful kings, there were strong men. And so private capital felt safe in the UK. Similarly, in Europe, they drove out the Jews, and British liberalism attracted the Jews. Okay, so the UK is very much a story of the success of freedom, the success of democracy. So the freedom project delivered, and we can see the date clearly here. So we get off to a long sustained period of economic growth, and now at the top of this graph, you're seeing 3,500 pounds, whereas the starting point was about 1,000 pounds. So now you have 3.5x compared to the starting point. And this takes us to 1860. For the first time in history, humans got sustained and substantial economic progress. So this is what Leontiev and Kuznets have called the first miracle of global economics. This is the UK story leading up to 1860. By 1860, it had spread all over Europe and America. And then you go all the way to 1960, and the damn thing just goes on. It goes on and on. The blue dotted line is present Indian per capita GDP. So India is at roughly US or UK values, standing in about 1913. So we are about 110 years behind. If you will circulate this slideshow, please, to everybody. What is in pink is a URL. So if you click on this, I have an article on how many years behind is India by many metrics. Okay, so I take some 5 or 6 metrics, and I take current Indian data, then I dig out ancient data from economic history for the US and the UK and find the comparable year. And the quick answer is that India is at US, UK levels of per capita GDP standing in 1913. So we are about 110 years behind as of today. Similarly, I make the claim number 5. 2 wars and 1 Great Depression did not knock this off course. The engine of sustained capitalist growth worked. Okay, so Karl Marx was wrong that the fluctuations will become better. Lenin was wrong that imperialism was essential to the project. Colonialism was essential to the project. These were wrong propositions. You can't even see 1947 on the achievements of the UK. Let me go one step further. You can't even see 1947 here, that when India became free, it in no way damaged growth in the UK. So if you like take Lenin's book on imperialism, he makes the opposite prediction, and he's wrong, that it is possible to run the UK without the colonial project. If you look at Karl Marx, he was wrong. This was not the prediction of what he claimed, that the fluctuations would become worse and the class struggle would become worse and this whole thing would fall apart. This is not true. The full flowering of liberal democracy and free markets took the UK to like past 25,000 pounds, starting from 1,000 pounds. Okay, so this is the backstory of what it means to achieve prosperity, what it means to become a successful economy. All of us have known this forever, but still it is stunning to see these graphs and to be reminded of these basics, because it is this experience speaks to contemporary thinking and contemporary debates, and it has not gone away in its power to surprise us and shake us even today. Okay, and this is a great quote from the great economist Robert Lucas, as he says, "The consequences for human welfare involved in questions like these are simply staggering. Once one starts to think about them, it is hard to think about anything else." Once you see this 20x, 25x gain of the UK per capita GDP, it is just life and death for the welfare of the individuals involved. And really, there is no bigger question in the world than how to do this. How the hell did they do this? How can we do this? It's like, what is holding us back from this greatness and glory? Okay, and you see, it's a journey over hundreds of years. So I would like to constantly remind all of us that, you don't need to get this done quickly. You need to get it done. And I feel sometimes we are trying for doing this too quickly. We are trying to skip many steps. And then we run into Ajit's problem of sustainability. That then we get a short spurt, but we've accumulated too much technical debt along the way, and then it doesn't work. So we need to lay the correct foundations. And look, if it takes 100 years, that's okay, because it's better to get it done in 100 years than to not get it done. Okay, so this takes me to the old growth theory. Economists first thought about mobilizing labor and capital. So you put people into the production process. So there is a L that goes into some formula, which is a number of man hours. And there is capital. We put machines, we put infrastructure. You walk around London in the mid 20th century as a young Robert Solow. You get impressed at the London Metro, which was built over 100 years, and its construction was finished in 1910. Okay, and you think, wow, this is vast sums of money. And you think of a homothetic technology that will double the number of man hours, will double the capital, you should get a doubling of the GDP. Okay, so crude mobilization of resources sounds very attractive. And when you're a poor country like India in 1947, and you think of the INC community of 100 years ago, you think we need a lot of capital. So there is a problem. We don't have enough capital. India is a poor country because we don't have enough capital. And then, of course, technological change. For the non-economists here, I want to emphasize that what the economists call technical change is actually management. Okay, the heart of it is management. It is about process improvement. Yes, of course, we need machines. Yes, of course, we need those lasers and computer numerically controlled lathes and all that. But at heart, what the economists call technical change is management. It is the genius of how Narayan Murthy and Nandan Nilekani put together 400,000 individuals into a firm called Infosys. That is technology. It's not the computers, it is management. So at heart, it's about how to mobilize capital and labor and build these firms. And then, of course, we'll need the machines. Yeah, we'll buy the machines, but we should not exaggerate the role of those machines. The secret sauce is management, whereby we can mobilize the machines. So this is Mark 1 growth theory. This is the old growth theory. So we think to get GDP growth, we should mobilize resources. And then we get to the journeys of the USSR, of Japan, of China, of Germany, where there was a state-led mobilization of capital and labor. And there was this idea that we have to do technological sophistication. Again, people didn't quite understand that the technology in question is not the blast furnace. It is the management inside a Tata Steel. And there was a lot of emphasis on state-driven push in favor of high technology and a lack of clarity on the role of the firm. The firm is the magic of modern capitalism. Yes, of course, you'll need the CNC lathes and the lasers, but firms will get them. The bottleneck is the firms. You need to get to the human institution called the firm. So this is the old growth theory. And for the economists in the room, this is roughly the intellectual cosmology inside the Solo Swan model, inside everything that I was taught as a PhD student. And by and large, that's not a good descriptor of the empirical experience. In the post-World War II period, only 4 countries started out poor and made it to OECD. They are Chile, South Korea, Taiwan, and Israel. So, would be rich countries before the Second World War. So Japan was destroyed and started over. Germany was destroyed and started over. But they had the full human capital. And so I treat that as too easy. Whereas here, these are genuinely poor countries. They started with nothing. Taiwan started as a Kuomintang and Chiang Kai-shek, and they built themselves into one of the world's great countries. So the simple recipes of old growth theory and development economics just did not work. Everything that was taught in the 50s and 60s about state mobilization of labor and capital and a developmental state, and basically everything in the development books of the 60s and 70s and 80s didn't work. Most countries that put this stuff into motion did not achieve high sustained growth. And only these 4 countries are OECD today, who were not OECD in 1945. And that begs for questioning the recipes of the old growth theory and the development economics. Now let me turn to India. This is the graph of the number of persons working. This is data based on the CMIE CPHS database. This is a household survey database where they meet about 170,000 households 3 times a year. Okay, so it's the largest household survey that has been done in India. It is the first panel data in India where the same household is met repeatedly, and they are met 3 times a year. The data goes a little further back to 2014, 2015, depending on some of the tables. I'm going to be super cautious and start at 2017 because there are some who believe that in the early 1-2 years there were inefficiencies and incompleteness in the CMI methodology in certain states. Okay, so I don't want to get into that debate.
For 7 long years, it's just been a constant number.
Yes, so I think nobody can doubt the strength of this data, and for 7 long years it's been fundamentally flat at about 400 million. There's a little bit of a gain right now. So in the last 1 year, we've got some gains after a long time. It's absolutely delightful seeing that it's gone up from about 400 million to about 420 million in the last 1 year. But if you were told that maybe on the left edge it's 405 million and it goes up to 420 million over 6 years, then we have a problem. Okay, so
Population has been going up.
precisely, that's what I'm going to go to next. So this is the sheer head count of number of persons working. In a household data context, this is not a job. The question that is asked to the household is, to the individual, every individual in every household is, did you work yesterday for remuneration? That's all. So if you worked yesterday, you're a worker. If you say, no, yesterday I had no work for remuneration, you're not a worker. That's all. So it's a very simple test that I don't care, did you go out into the street and sell bananas? You're working. Or you sat at home, did nothing, you're not working.
Every week or every month?
The households are met 3 times a year, and they are asked about what were you doing in January, what were you doing in February. So I've asked, and it's a rolling sample, right? I mean, it takes 4 months to survey the full India, and then they start it all over again. So what they do is that the households that were met in January, they release a January estimator. The households that were met in February, they release a February estimate. Now, because 170,000 households divided by 4 is a very large sample, the January estimate is a good estimate. Okay, so this is the first quick fact, that there is a big stuck in Indian growth today, where the number of persons working has not been faring well. It's delightful that in the last 1 year there is some gain, but really over a 6-year period, there's no good gain. Further, I said this data actually goes to 2015. There is a little bit of a controversy because some states there were some problems, but if I push this back, it's the same picture. It's basically the same answer. I just didn't want to get into that terrain because potentially there are some concerns about some states in those years. But from December 2017, the methodology is completely stable, everything is comparable, and there is a big stuck. And as you said a moment ago, that the denominator is actually growing. 16 to 64 is the working age population. So you measure the labor force participation. For everybody here, what is labor force participation? In the denominator, it is persons 16 to 64. And in the numerator, it is either you are working or you say, I am unemployed, which means I don't have work, I desire work, and I'm searching for work. All this is counted in the numerator. So the numerator is, I am in the labor force, meaning even if I'm not working, I desire work and I'm searching for work, then I'm counted as unemployed. So the numerator is employed plus unemployed divided by working age population. And what you see is a systematic decline. What we see in the Indian data is people just give up. People just say, no, I'm not looking for work, or no, I don't want work because it's hopeless. And so you see a large amount of this hopelessness that there is no work for me, why bother? They survive partly on intra-household transfers, and they survive on welfare. They survive on subsidies. Okay, so this is becoming a country where a large chunk of people are just, getting government dole. Okay, so it's absolutely scary that we started out at the left edge at 44%, and today we are at 41% with a recent improvement in economic conditions of the last 6 months. But for the rest, in the post-pandemic period, we were at sub-40 values. These are essentially the lowest values in the whole world. Okay, the Chinese value is something like 67%. So 67% of the age 16 to 64 in China is working. And this is essentially the lowest value in the whole world. It's small. So the unemployed I'm just going to remember 2-3 percentage points are unemployed, 39 are working. Okay, and see, this is not to be taken too seriously. The word unemployment in India is a bit useless. What we see in the data is people say, I'm not interested in working. And next survey, he's working. Okay, people don't want to admit in front of the field investigator that I don't have a job, I desire a job, I'm looking for a job. It makes him feel like a loser. So I don't respect the word unemployment. But yeah, we're counting the word unemployment here. I think that there is a major social problem in these low values. I think that working is fundamental to being a human being in this world today, and it is a problem that we have essentially the lowest values in the whole world. Okay, and this is the share of non-workers. So I showed you the labor force participation. Here I'm saying people who are not working, whether they call themselves unemployed or not. It was about some 58%. It of course went to 74% at the lockdowns of the early pandemic period, and today it stands at 63%. So 2/3 of the working age population is not working. Now some people are at college, some women are bringing up children at home, that's okay. So there are reasons for this, but 63% is a bad number, is an unacceptable number, is essentially the worst number in the world. Bangladesh is better, Pakistan is better. Okay, we have a problem. And I go to capital. There are poor measures of capital coming out of the national account statistics. I much prefer to work with the firm data. So here, the work that I have done is I take 2 consecutive years. I make sure that there is a matched set of firms. So the identical firm is observed at time t and time t+1. And I add up all the net fixed assets of the observed firms at year t and at year t+1, and I measure how much was the percentage gain. So this is the best measure of the investment process in India. And what we see basically is that there was a boom in the mid-90s. Then there was the slump of the 2001 to 2003 period. Then there was another boom in the mid-2000s. And after that, there has been a long slump. And it's been a pretty long time since that long slump. So 2007, 2008 was the last boom. We're now standing in 2023. It's been a pretty long period of this slump. Okay. Yes, firms. As long as it's an annual report that is seen in the CMI database, I count this. There's a current debate on 70 hours a week. Okay, Narayan Murthy encouraged every young person to work 70 hours a week. I've left a URL there. So if you just click on what is the case for 70 hours a week, you'll see some arguments. Of course, it's good for young people to work 70 hours a week, but in macroeconomics, it doesn't square. That if you double the work hours by everybody in India and you double the amount of amount of capital in the country to commensurately do that, it gets you a doubling of GDP, but it doesn't make India an advanced economy because the per capita GDP of India is 1/9 that of the frontier. So if you get a doubling, it doesn't take you to the frontier. That is a lot that goes into becoming an advanced economy. Okay, so the great puzzle is why are resources not being mobilized? Okay, so we have so much labor in India, it's not being used. The old growth theory says, bring me labor and bring me capital and also give me productivity gains. And I will make you GDP. Ajit has been inside private sector corporations. There is no discernible difference between the machines in the companies that Ajit saw compared to the global frontier. Okay, the science and engineering, nobody buys really bad machines anymore. For the last 3 months, I have been extensively visiting garment and fabric and yarn shop floors in India. And the most pessimistic estimate that I have seen is that there may be some good factories that are 2x better than this. So see, India is 1/9 of the United States. The factories are at most 2x worse. The remainder is in management, it's in the processes. And if you put enough labor and enough capital into good processes, you'll get to that first world GDP. But it looks like vast amounts of labor is sitting around and it's not being used. Okay, we have that labor in the country, but only 400 million people are working. And most people of working age are not working. 2/3 of the people of working age are not working. So it feels like you're leaving money on the table. There is this labor in the country and it is not being used. Okay, similarly capital. I have lost all interest in the words shortage of capital. There is no shortage of capital because there is infinite capital in the global financial system. It is about Indian institutions. It's about the ability of Indian firms and Indian policymakers to permit those highways whereby foreign capital will come into India. Infosys was not built out of Indian capital. Infosys is a company where they were dominated by the use of foreign capital. The Indian software industry is built out of foreign capital. You don't wait for mobilizing capital from this poor country. This is a very poor country. But there's infinite capital available abroad. Okay, the thumb rule in the field is that the investable pool internationally is about 200 to 250 trillion dollars. Okay, so it's basically infinity. So it's just a matter of getting the capital controls out of the way, and then the Indian firms have to go to the world with bankable projects. You go to the world with good projects, you'll get infinite money. So it seems the puzzle is there is infinite capital, there is infinite labor, and we are a poor country. The old growth theory doesn't know what to do with that. Like, what is holding this up? Why is this thing not getting tied up? That is the choke point. There is the capital, there is the labor, and it's not tying together. I mean, yes, of course, you want productivity gains, and we are getting productivity gains, but there is something more basic, that there is money being left on the table. There's infinite capital outside, there's infinite labor here. Why is it not all getting plugged up to get to some quadrupling of GDP? I'm almost done, Ajit. 19 of 22. I'm almost done. I have only one slide more. No, I have only one slide more. And that's what brings me to what I think is the new growth theory. Again, I'm giving it a fancy name, new growth theory. It is the modern consensus on development, that we no longer believe any of the development economics of 25 years ago. Today, institutional thinking is the key, and Dr. Kelkar and I basically wrote a book out of it, that the resources are not the bottleneck. The magic is in the people that build firms, that bring labor and capital together. It is in making an institution that produces value added. All the key decisions in advanced economy are made inside firms by private people. So what shapes their behavior? And that takes us to the state. And so what is the agenda on state capacity? It is about property rights, expropriation, harassment, fair play, and the state institutions that address market failure, the state and non-state institutions that intermediate conflicts, and the foundation of enlightenment values. As I emphasized earlier, there is a very direct link between enlightenment values in the UK as creating conditions for the flourishing of capitalism. We cannot forget those political foundations of freedom and civil liberties and rule of law and freedom of speech and so on. Those basics are the inner engine that creates conditions for capitalism. So I'm at the end of this talk, and I hope this is interesting, and let's talk further about all this.
Please give him a warm applause. As you can see, Professor Ajay Shah, he speaks clearly, lucidly, and with a lot of conviction, but don't buy all of it. But it was very clear, crystal clear, and I congratulate him especially because he gave almost a 40-minute talk, and I don't think you mentioned the word China. So congratulations. So I'm going to invite, I think, the discussant for this presentation. Or you will, we'll open the discussion and then we will have your closing comment. Okay. So we will now have a open discussion on the talk, and then we will conclude with Dr. Kelkar's observations. So I think we have mics around the table, so please feel free to jump in. I think I will moderate the discussion, but I'll try to be, he said fair play, so we'll try that.
So why didn't you mention China? Because surely Chinese growth is a modern miracle, 30 years of 10% growth. You can't have a presentation on growth and not mention China.
I mentioned China briefly under USSR and Japan and China as early experiments of state mobilized growth. Today, I think, so there was a period where China was considered a puzzle, that with bad institutions and sort of violating a lot of the rules of this book, they managed to get growth. And I think that we are seeing that story run into the difficulty. So I think ever since Xi Jinping deepened the authoritarian nature of the Chinese state, it actually worked as a reversal compared to the Deng Xiaoping reforms. And that has exerted damage on the Chinese growth story. So I think today China is less puzzling. There was a period where it was puzzling, where the Deng Xiaoping project was liberalizing both Chinese politics and economics, and China was getting remarkable growth at a time when the institutions were frankly not much good. But I think today, standing in 2023, when we look back, Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, 2013, and it fits this story that Chinese growth has caught up with Chinese institutions, and we've seen a steady decline in Chinese economic performance. And I think today China fits this story that you can't become an advanced economy without the institutional quality, and China is far from being an advanced economy. The poorest European country is Portugal, and China is at half of the per capita GDP of Portugal. So China is not an advanced economy by any stretch. It was an unsustainable attempt, similar to Stalinist accumulation, where the state mobilized some growth and it works for some time and then it runs out of juice. Singapore is very small, so because we are India, we are so arrogant. Singapore is indeed a success story of growth, but we tend to disrespect anything with a population smaller than Andheri. So I just left Singapore out. Let's discuss the other four. Okay, it's a great question that what's the secret sauce that goes into all these? So again, precisely in continuation of where I was on China, we should not think about short bursts of growth. Sustainability is a very big deal. It's not a small matter to keep going for decades. So in some sense, in the Indian story, there is really one burst of growth, 1991 to 2011. Okay, and before and after, India did not do a great job of growth. India got one great growth episode, 1991 to 2011. Like that, many countries get episodes of growth and then fail to go through and follow up. And today, China looks like one more of that. That is my respect for Israel, Taiwan, South Korea, and Chile. I am very conversant with the history, and nobody should whitewash the human rights and authoritarian catastrophes of the early years of South Korea, of the early years of Chile and the Allende period, and the early years of Taiwan was a disgusting dictatorship. And in Israel's case, they have had a certain kind of apartheid where they are unfair to Arabs. Okay, in some ways, a bit reminiscent of the Indian treatment of Muslims and lower caste. Okay, so that's the blot on the Israel story. But over the years, these countries have managed to find their pieces together. Today, all these countries are glorious democracies. If you look at the Freedom House rankings, they are all vastly ahead of India. And they've managed to keep up decade after decade with that sustained economic growth. And today, their per capita GDP is in middle of Europe. So they are countries that fought with their demons and conquered their demons and got on that magical feedback loop of an ever-increasing arc of political freedom, civil liberties, deepening democracy, and GDP growth. They got all these pieces together. Not South Africa. South Africa is in some ways worse than India today. Okay, they are deeply stuck and in some ways worse than India today. But these four countries, I have no doubt that the initial conditions in Taiwan, in South Korea, and Chile were horrible, were absolutely terrible. But the thing is, they managed to get onto those feedback loops and just got better and better. They kept improving economic freedom, they kept improving political freedom, they kept increasing freedom of press, freedom of speech, civil liberties, and the whole thing fed on itself, and they got on the engine of economic growth. And today, they fit the entire institutional story. You say rule of law, independent judiciary, regulatory institutions, the working of capitalism, financial markets, sophisticated firms, all these things. These countries got to that by about $10,000 per capita GDP. They're completely recognizable like an OECD country. Okay? So in that sense, they escaped from poverty by taking on to this recipe. I cannot help tell a side story. Does everybody know the story of Chiang Kai-shek and his son in Taiwan? Okay, so Chiang Kai-shek was the KMT leader who was driven out of China by Mao's army, and he went to Taiwan. There is a piece of cheating that goes into the early story of both Hong Kong and Taiwan, which is that the intellectual and the moneyed elite of China ran away to Taiwan and Hong Kong. So these were unusual starting conditions. So, imagine if a lot of the Indian intellectuals and rich people were concentrated into one place at 1947. That place would do very well. So there's a bit of cheating that Taiwan got an unusual endowment of people and Hong Kong got an unusual endowment of people. Hong Kong got British institutions and it took off. Everything went great starting from about the 70s. In Taiwan, it was a disgusting dictatorship. Chiang Kai-shek ran a brutal police state against communist opponents. He had this hatred of communists, which came out of being driven out of China. Then one day he died, and his son inherited this. Okay. Now the son was a mild, soft, sweet human being. So he basically went to the Americans and said, that here are the keys to the country. Please make a constitution for this country and make it a nice democracy. And I just want to run away. I want to leave. I don't want to rule this country. So the Americans worked with them to draft a constitution. And that's how Taiwan got on the road to being a democracy. And then it just took off and everything is great. Today, Taiwan is like practically an OECD country in terms of the levels of freedom. You take any kind of personal freedom, civil liberty, Taiwan has it.
So just want to add that all these 4 countries, Israel, the per capita aid before this military aid to Israel in per capita terms is the highest in the world. The only other country which comes close is Egypt, and for some time it was Pakistan. Secondly, South Korea to this day, today, has a major military base in Seoul, a very thorny issue. Chile, overthrow of, by the way, Allende was overthrown. So he was not the dictator. So, also he was talking about Taiwan. So in each of these 4 stories, the role of American aid, it's not Marshall Plan, but it's the role of American aid on a sustained basis cannot be overlooked. But I think the other points which Ajay said we need to examine.
I just wanted to, seek your thoughts on, would you say that the last decade, we've talked about job-less growth, but there is job loss growth. That's one. Of course, productivity has increased. So that's on the labor side, that it's not getting absorbed. But in terms of the companies or the corporates, the appetite for risk is very low in India. And therefore, I think it's very much guided by the MEC is less than the rate of interest, typically in Keynesian terms, So we don't see that there is capital everywhere. India's, we are third. Development indicators can take a ride. But I feel it's the job loss growth. And I'm surprised there's no revolution for that. And in terms of the MEC, what is the way forward?
I showed the time series of the number of persons working, and it's broadly flat. Now, that's macroeconomics. There will always be microeconomics. There will be some industries that are getting destroyed in this period where people are losing jobs. And there'll be some industries where there is job creation. I have no doubt that IT-enabled services, there has been job creation in these years. But net, we're getting a roughly flat environment, or a couple of single-digit % over a 6-year period, which is not a good place to be. So I don't share a story of job loss growth, though undoubtedly in a microeconomic sense, there will be job loss. There will be certain sectors that get destroyed and certain sectors that do very well. In terms of the risk appetite of firms, I have an opinion and a subjective sense of what happened. I think that there was a glorious period, 1991 to 2011. And after that, there's been a good deal of uncertainty. The risk environment faced by the firms has become a little adverse. This includes man-made phenomena like demonetization, natural disasters like COVID, and the emergence of policy risk in the form of the behavior of the Indian state. So today, when you add up the regulators and the agencies and policy changes, it has just all added up to too much concern, too much fear. Your business model can be disrupted because some government will change something tomorrow. So from 1991 to 2011, I think that my psychoanalysis of the Indian business class, and I'd love to hear the views of everybody in this room because all of you know this better than me. My psychoanalysis of the 1991 to 2011 period was something like this. The Indian state was far from fixed. Okay, let's have no illusions. It was not a great, well-functioning, it was not an OECD country. It was not an advanced economy. We did not have Magna Carta rights in 1991 to 2011. Okay, the Indian state was in violation of the Magna Carta in the 1991 to 2011 period. But the Indian elite had made up its mind that things are getting better. So there was a sense of progress, that we are in a journey of liberalization, that freedom will go up, political freedom will go up, economic freedom will go up, things are getting better. So that was part one, that let's jump in, let's take the risks, because while things are bad today, there is a better tomorrow. So there was a sense of progress that year after year, there was one liberalization after another, and freedoms went up, civil liberties went up, economic freedom went up, restrictions went away. India kept getting better. So that was part one of the principles and philosophy that created that period of optimism. The second part was that there was an elite compact. The Indian state was composed of people who were sociologically similar to the firms. And so every now and then the Indian state would do something stupid, something would get disrupted in some firm, some business model, and there would be an ability to reach out, speak with people, ask questions, criticize a policy, sometimes get a problem solved, sometimes get a problem fixed. Yes, it did involve certain elements of corruption, but there was a live and let live, and there was an easy comfort inside the ability to participate in a joint conversation around policy, and sometimes, though not always, solve problems. So I think that was a little bubble of the magic of 1991 to 2011, which has got disrupted in the following years.
Sorry, very interesting conversation so far. I'm just looking at the heading of the securing demographic dividend, and I think we have to begin with securing demography in the country. Most of the successes that you've seen in the world have relied upon strong human capital. And in your lecture also, you didn't sort of stress upon that fact. Now, if you look at the education and health standards today, they're so horrible. And of course, secondly, they are under the control of the states. So you have various sort of levels of education and health across the country. Varies from one to the other. You look at Tamil Nadu, is probably far better than what is there in Bihar, and so on. Interestingly, I just wanted to share a recent incident. Ashok Gehlot, the former Chief Minister of Rajasthan, conducted a wide crowdsourcing of opinion. Got about 3.5 crore opinions from ordinary people across the whole state, in a state of about the total population maybe about 5 crores or 6 crores. I'm not sure about the latest figure, but 3 crore to 20 lakhs was a huge figure. And there were two issues which came out very clearly. This is in the context of freebies also, which has been happening at that point of time. People said, people's voice, and we must listen to people also, which we often don't, unfortunately. We want education and health, and an attack on corruption. That was the third priority that they had. Their first two priorities were very clearly education and health, so that they are familiar with the fact that, look, we are deprived of the best possible education and health, and that is what we require. Now, my other problem is that at the union level, we are progressing towards becoming a Vishwaguru, even in economy. We are now the 5th largest economy. And, sorry? By aggregate GDP, and we should become third, and so on and so forth. And then that would lead to the kind of problem which the lady here spoke about. What we saw in the decade was jobless growth. And this may then lead to, in spite of the fact that the Prime Minister Modi speaks about human-centric development. The moment he talks about human-centric development, you're looking at what is the title of this event, which I thought is an excellent idea, that if you can focus on the human element of economy and then progress further as to what are the things which are required in order to create jobs, good jobs and better jobs. This is the other problem. Now, in the small-scale sector, the field work that we've done, as Ajit knows, and even Ajay, you know, is we find that the SMEs are in a very bad shape. They treat their workers like nothing, in the sense that case. And don't forget that majority employer today in the world, in the country, is SMEs. Now, how do you change all these things in the event if you want to create a demographic dividend? Now, just to give you an example, I mean, something which I have often found very funny is that you talk about software services, the Infosys, the Wipro, etc., etc. These are all body shops. None of them have come up with any good idea which, the Googles or the Microsoft or Facebook have done. or today even LinkedIn, for example. And all these institutes, all these companies are being driven by Indian brains. The all Indian brains who are working there. Why could these Wipros and Tata, TCS could not do it? I just can't understand. They never thought about it as far as they could, make money in outsourcing, business outsourcing. That's it. I mean, they may have done a little bit of innovation here and there, but then nothing very substantive. I had a long chat with Nandan Nilekani about it, because he was being very defensive about it. No, we did this, we did that. I said, look, these things don't matter much. Have you created a LinkedIn? Have you created a Facebook? Have you created an Instagram? No. Have you created a TikTok? No. Why could the Chinese do it and Americans do it, but not Indian? Now, the issue is that we require a rethink on many of these things, frankly. Ajay, pardon me, but there are a lot of old theories that you spoke about, comparing ourselves with UK, etc. Doesn't make sense. We'll have to think about a new way when we talk in terms of human capital-oriented economic development and attack it at that particular level, which means you look at all the possible inputs which is going to human capital, education, health, skills. These three at least are most essential elements. And that is where the thinking has to be of the intellectual community in the country, which is not happening, unfortunately. We keep on getting lost with, several other things. Even China, for example, is still not doing badly. Of course, it is not doing as good as it did, but it has already set a momentum. So maybe it is growing at 2.5%, 3% or 3.5%. It's not so bad. I mean, they also suffered from subprime problem, if you remember that, Evergrande and all that kind of running into billions of dollars and so on. So they have these problems. Now, one thing which you spoke about in terms of risk, we had very high amount of NPAs at one point of time. So all the banks became extremely shy to lend capital, lend money. That, of course, has fortunately changed. Government has been able to clear the NPAs through a magic wand. Most of them, about 150,000 150 lakh crores has disappeared from the bank books. The double balance sheet problem is not there so much today. Money is available, but as Ajay pointed out correctly, we need bankable projects and we need bankable,
Hello, thank you very much for a very interesting kind of an exposition. I wanted to ask you if increasing employment was ever the centerpiece of policy making in India. Because if you start with the second 5-year plan, you see that, and then jump to the opening up of the economy in 1991. What one sees is that the government or the policy makers are really interested in mainly two things. One is having a high rate of growth, and second is controlling inflation, and for obvious reasons. So in the second 5-year plan, it is very, very clearly said that even if the employment is not increasing in the short run, in the long run, things will sort themselves out. And when we opened up, we should have moved towards employment-intensive industrialization because we had surplus of workers, but it didn't happen. And because there was a lot of path dependency and whole lot of other reasons. So actually, since employment has not been a centerpiece, how can we even expect that employment would rise? And there are social and political and economic reasons why such a thing has not happened. But I don't want to talk about those. But employment is not going to increase unless it becomes a centerpiece the way it became in China. I'd just like to quote one author who wrote in 1957. He was an American expert on India and China. His name was Baum. And he said that the stress which I see in the Chinese circles with respect to creating employment, I don't see that kind of a tension within the Indian policy makers. This he said in 1957. And I think that that is true of India even now. I would like your comments.
It's okay. I'll be very brief. It's interesting, sir. You said while UK was championing liberal democracy, it was busy colonizing other countries, which is very antithesis of thing. But that's aside. That's not the main point. The point I want to make, sir, you talked about rightly. Ajay, the point. Okay. The point, Ajay, I want to bring out is, we talked about risk capital. You talked about capital being available but not being capped in India. But the same India, there are certain pockets in India which operating under the same federal state seem to be generating employment, seem to be getting foreign direct investment, seems to be creating capital, and also are appear to be socially more inclusive. So if policy making is the key thing, why is it that this country, parts of this country are very beautiful for investors, and part of the countries, unfortunately my state included, Maharashtra, is not being attractive? So there is something more to it than a macro level. Just for your thoughts.
See, the chair and the speaker are going to be available even after this, and we're going to have, I think, drinks and dinner. So can I just get into the wrap-up phase of this session? So I'll request Ajay to answer these questions, Mr. Pradeep, Professor Sathe, and two Pradeeps here. And then I'll request Dr. Kelkar for his concluding remarks.
So let me quickly respond, and I would love to talk further over dinner. Why did I say nothing about health and education? I want to put a light on this fact that in a country of 1.4 billion people, only 0.4 billion people are working. So that's the outstanding stylized empirical fact. So in some sense, the choke point is not that those 0.4 billion people don't have better health and better education and can potentially work better. The choke point is that there is really a 2x gap between India and China on the labor force participation, and I feel that's an interesting and important puzzle, that why is there such a large reservoir of untapped people? I mean, why are we still in a very early stage of a Lewis model where most people are not in the labor force? If I may continue with some cold-hearted economist thinking on this subject, India is roughly 100 years, 110 years behind the UK. Health and education indicators in India today are a bit better than they were in the UK 110 years ago. There were no antibiotics in the UK. There were no vaccines in the UK 110 years ago. So that's not the choke point. That's not the binding constraint. I mean, yeah, of course you should do better on health and education. I have plenty knowledge and opinion on what to do better on public health. In the book that Kelkar and I wrote, there is one chapter on health. There's one chapter on COVID vaccines. Okay, I'm full of opinions on health. I just want to say it's not first order. There's something else that's first order, which is what is holding back the mobilization of the resources of this country. Okay. Next, I want to turn to second 5-year plan and the priority. The institutions. I mean, my last slide. The institutions.
PMLA.
Yeah. The risk environment of firms, the relationship between the firms and the state. Turning to second 5-year plan and economic policy strategy by the state that emphasizes labor. I think that there was central planning in India and it did not work too well, either because the planners did not do the right things or because, as Land Pritchett would say, the planners did not have much control over the vast economy. So I don't look to the state to create jobs. It's not the job of the state to create jobs. So funny story, I joined the Ministry of Finance in 2001, and in my second or third month, I was in a very important meeting in the North Block. What was that very important meeting? It was to set the exports target. Okay, and I was the child in the room that said that the emperor has no clothes. I said that the exporting is done by garment exporters and handlooms and power looms and software companies all over India. Who are you guys? What are you guys doing to do anything about exports? So the word target is not, it's just fatuous. This is not a centrally planned economy. In my opinion, this should not be a centrally planned economy, but that's a separate debate. It is not a centrally planned economy. The government has nothing whatsoever to do with what firms do. It is firms that mobilize labor and capital and make jobs. Okay, so my counterfactual would be like, why do Indian entrepreneurs not use the near infinite capital available from the world market and hire millions of people into labor-intensive, low-skill jobs at Indian levels of some semi-literacy and bad health? Okay, again, I say in the 19th century in the UK, the labor force was illiterate and pretty unhealthy, and they managed to get and sustain a GDP growth process in that period. So the interesting question is at the firms. Firms make prosperity. Firms make jobs. Firms are the site of productivity gains. Economics happens inside firms. And so we should be asking, what does the state do to reshape the incentives of the firms? Okay. Finally, I just want to make the distinction between microeconomics and macroeconomics. There are undoubtedly glorious individual firms and industries in India. Okay, so like similar to what I was saying about job loss. Some industries got destroyed. So, for example, I think you and I will remember that there was once a nascent computer hardware industry in India. It was a creature of protectionism. There was an electronics corporation, India Limited in Hyderabad, which was SL, which was making a pirated copy of an IBM 360 computer. Yeah. Okay. So those kinds of things were going on in India. And of essence was the trade liberalization of the late 80s and early 90s, which destroyed the nascent Indian hardware industry. Okay, which made the Indian software industry possible, because it's a great trade that India buys the hardware and exports the software. So there will always be individual industries that do well and badly. There will always be individual companies that do well and badly. But we should look in the aggregate. There will be individual regions that do badly. And by the way, I think Maharashtra is a great winner in the Konkan and Bombay-Pune zone. It's beyond that Maharashtra gets really bad. By and large, the Konkan from Gujarat till Goa and Bombay-Pune and even Bombay-Nashik is flourishing, is one of India's most successful regions. When you go further behind, things get bad. So I think of Maharashtra as a great winner of the Indian journey, and the badlands of India are elsewhere.
Okay, I'll request Dr. Kelkar for his remarks. Yeah.
No, I don't propose to give remarks on what has been spoken. I want to just explain what is the purpose of this meeting and what we're going to do tomorrow and what is going to be the outcome of this. Last 7 years, we have been organizing a conference every year on around one topic. And we used to get papers on that topic alone, and we used to publish. It used to get published by journal of on integrated markets, market integration, which is being brought out by IDF. It's an online journal. 5 years ago, what we did was we brought out a paper and we circled all the political parties. And even 10 years ago, I think, isn't it? It was 2014 or so. When did we have? 2014 also. Even 2014 we started the exercise. That election we circulated, and also 2019. And I think at least this, I was quite pleasantly surprised that that time both Prime Minister Modi, that time he was of course not Prime Minister yet, but and Mrs. Gandhi responded. And we had a conference of all the major parties in Delhi, and then we did similar exercise, and hopefully we helped to sort of create some kind of impact on thinking. And I personally gone through one very pleasant experience in 2009 when I was in Delhi, and that time the election time platform was being written. The person who was putting together the India platform was Sudhendra Kulkarni, and one was putting together the UP platform was Jairam Ramesh. I happened to have access to both of them, and I made one point only to them, appeal to them on single rate GST of 12%. And both manifestos had this. And I think that kind of multi-party coalition helped. And it's important because India is the only federal country where this kind of success has come at the shortest possible time. Canada, Australia and Brazil took much longer time. So I think it has it is helpful, let me put it this way. That's the reason this has been, but this time we thought that let's involve as many of our colleagues from independent think tanks together. So 4 or 5 of us have come together and request to each one of them where they have done work. For instance, Pradeep Mehta has really done the pioneering work on whole issue of regulation
regulatory and also competition policy. Similarly, IHS is doing very interesting work on urban. Gokhale Institute has been working on various issues of development policy. So given this, we prepared this program which builds on strength of each organization. Now tomorrow whole day we'll discuss those papers. And then like we did last time, then we will draw upon once again Professor Ajay Shah's absolute incredible capacity to put things together in a very, very understandable way. And it will be circulated to our parties which is on a non-attributable basis. That will not be attributed to any person or any organizations. But culled upon this, what happens today, many other inputs were requested. For instance, some of the issues, if you still want to add, please send us if they come by end of the month of December, is good enough because still we have time to put those ideas together in the. So that is what all the purpose all about. And I was only one remark was that I remember Ajay, that one of the reasons why England prevailed on France in the wars, because the capital markets in England were far more developed, and they could mobilize defense expenditure, raise the market at very, very low costs. That really helped England to prevail on France. So what you said, absolutely right, that long sort of history of institutions and abilities. And the capital market is the most important. There's really one marker in my view about the quality of the institutions because they're the most finicky. The capital is very mobile and they're extremely sensitive to the quality of institutions. So that's one. This I'm going to add to what he said as example, as a very concrete example. So we're going to cover trade issue also because one of our colleagues is Dr. Singh, unfortunately his flight he couldn't get the earlier flight from Delhi. He's come, but tomorrow he'll be here. So we'll discuss about the most important, I think, one of the most disturbing trend of the last few years has been the reversal of our trade policy. And that can really give setback to India's any growth ambitions. So that's a very important issue we'll take up tomorrow. And finally, the another issue to me of great concern and importance, I think, is the whole issue of cooperative federalism. That will also take up tomorrow when Yamini will speak on it. Then we'll all put together, we'll leave it to good hands of Professor Ajay Shah, and he did last two. And what I propose to do tomorrow, I'll request Vishal to circulate to you all as a sort of information what happened 5 years ago, what happened 10 years ago. So you know how that was put together. So not a printed copy, but soft copies, we'll give them to you. So with this remark, I hand over this conference back to Professor. You know, I must confess this, for the last several months over, I really stopped reading economics. So I'm really not of a contemporary issues. These days I'm working on some other class of issues. So I don't have an easy answer to what you're raising. So I broadly agree with the long view of history which Ajay has taken. And that's, I think, we should sort of focus in terms of the binding constraints is really, those are the binding constraints you want to sustain growth. But the specific issue of employment and education, I will not look at concrete things offered.
The Havana Charter, 1948, was on growth in employment.
I know. I know, but those are problems which came after the whole came out, response by the developed countries to the ravages brought in by the advanced countries. The rise of fascism, Nazism came precisely because of unemployment. So they didn't want to revisit those issues. So there was different history they had. Anyway, I'll hand it to.
So we'll wrap up. So I think I'll, as chair, maybe can I have some 2 minutes of concluding words? One is about jobless growth, Professor Sathe. I think this is actually a global problem. I'm told there was a World Bank number which said there are 2 billion people in the world who are neither in school, nor in education, nor in training, and not in employment. So this perhaps reflects as youth unemployment, or I mean, you can see some numbers in countries like even France where youth unemployment numbers are very high. But despite all these numbers, the workforce participation rates in India still are worryingly low. I mean, we know that jobless, whether you call it jobless growth or the fact that the growth process is not generating enough employment and so on, we can discuss that tomorrow. But despite all that, globally, we have to acknowledge that India's workforce participation rates, especially for women, I think are low. And so this is a puzzle, and I completely agree with you that actually the focus has to be, is it something about India's education and health policy or human capital policy in general, where the answer lies. And perhaps when we produce this collective document, we'll give enough stress to that. Incidentally, I should again repeat what Dr. Kelkar said. Please, if you want to send something and you want to write it and think about it and write it, please submit it in the next 2 or 3 weeks, because then we'll start compiling it. And as you said, this is going to be produced as a document with non-attributable approach, so it will be a collective document. And finally, just to end on a slightly lighter note, I should go to 2 or 3 people. One is the great Joan Robinson, who said that everything that you say about India is true, and so is the opposite. Then the great Mr. Galbraith, who loved India, he said, India is somehow it works. I think he said functioning anarchy or functioning anarchy. So, you know, don't be disheartened if you're not understanding the problems of India. And
just to add to what you said, I'm told that after visiting India, both Bulgarian and Khrushchev they got rid of the atheism. And they started believing in God. He said, how do you explain India?
And lastly, in a little cheekish, some was maybe, क्या बोलते हैं, थोड़ा सा nasty joke is, India is a country with a great future and shall always be so. So anyway, on that count, we'll wrap up and I give it back to you. Is it? Okay, thank you.
So as we draw the curtains to this inaugural session, so let me thank Dr. Ranade, Vice Chancellor of Gokhale Institute, for chairing this session. Thank you, sir. A special word of thanks to Professor Ajay Shah for delivering the keynote address. Your enlightening thoughts have provided us much food for thought, though the food will be served outside. And you have undoubtedly set the stage for stimulating discussion that will follow over the next day. So I thank Dr. Kelkar for your leaderships and insight that have set a profound tone for the conference. Your presence has been inspiring to us all. As we conclude these sessions, we are reminded the power of collaborative efforts and the importance of continued discourse in shaping the future of our nations. The insight gained today lay the groundwork for the discussions to come, and we look forward to the rich exchanges and the next sessions that will happen tomorrow. So thank you all, and I wish you all engaging and fruitful conference ahead. Thank you.